11 Plus Problem of the Week, Week 2. This week we're going to look at a challenging problem from a recent 11 Plus paper for an independent school. Let's look at the question. 4 tomatoes weigh the same as 3 apples. 2 apples weigh the same as 5 limes. How many limes weigh the same as 40 tomatoes? Well, first of all, let's make sure that we're using the rucksack method to make sure there's nothing we're missing out. So first of all, we're going to read the problem. So we'll read that again to yourself. Then we're going to underline the important information. So it tells us that 4 tomatoes weigh the same as 3 apples. 2 apples are the same as 5 limes. And then what they want us to work out is the number of limes that weigh the same as 40 tomatoes. So let's take the information that we've been given. So we know that 4 tomatoes weigh the same as 3 apples. So I can write that down and say that 4T, T for tomatoes, is the same, an equal sign, as 3 apples. That's our first bit of information that we know from the question. We also know that 2 apples, so I'll write this down, and I've written it on the same side as where my other apples are just to make it a bit easier. That weighs the same as 5 limes, so I'm going to put 5L. So I know from the question that 4T is the same as 3A and 5L is the same as 2A. And what we want to know is how many limes are the same as 40 tomatoes. Now we need to choose which calculation we're going to do next. Now I can see here that I'm going to need to use a bit of algebra here. I'm going to need to compare the different terms I've been given and see how I can use that information to help me find out how many limes are worth 40 tomatoes. Well, first of all, we know that we need to work out what 40 tomatoes is the same as, and we can see already that we know what 4 tomatoes is the same as. And this is quite nice because we know that 4 tomatoes, if we make that 10 times bigger, we get 40. So I know that 4 tomatoes is equal to 3 apples. Well, if I times the 4 tomatoes by 10, I'm going to get 40 tomatoes. And because I've times that by 10, I need to times the other side by 10. So 3 apples times by 10 is going to be 30 apples. But the question is actually asking us how many limes is equal to 40 tomatoes. So far I know that 40 tomatoes is equal to 30 apples, and that's going to be equal to a certain number of limes. So again, let's remind ourselves about what we know already. So we now know that 40 tomatoes here is the same as 30 apples. So 40 tomatoes is the same as 30 apples. But I'm interested in limes, so let's look at the information we have about limes. I know that 5 limes is the same as 2 apples. So I now want to see, well, what's the relationship between my apples here? 30 apples and 2 apples. So how can I get from having 2 apples to having 30 apples? Well, to get from 2 to 30, remember we're always multiplying or dividing. To get from 2 to 30, I can see that I'm going to need to times by 15. So to get 30 apples, I times by 15. So I need to do that to the other side of my equation. I did have 5 limes. I'm going to times that by 15, and 15 times 5 is 75 limes. So I know that 75 limes is equal to 30 apples. So I now have that 75 limes is equal to 30 apples. Well, over here we knew that 30 apples was equal to 40 tomatoes. So now what I found out is that 40 tomatoes is equal to 30 apples, and that's equal to 75 limes. And that's what the question asked us. It said how many limes would be equal to 40 tomatoes, and I've worked out that the answer is 75 limes. Now it's your turn to answer another similar question so you can practice that technique. So 8 cats weigh the same as 6 dogs. 4 dogs weigh the same as 10 rabbits. How many rabbits weigh the same as 80 cats? So have a try and then we'll go through the answers. How did you do? Let's go through the answers. So the question told us that 8C is equal to 6D and that 10R is equal to 4D. And the question wants me to find out how many R are equal to 80C. So at this point I can see that I've got 8C and 80C, and I can see that if I times 8 by 10 I get 80. So if I know that 8C equals 6D, then 80C must be equal to 60D. So now I want to know, well, how does 4D and 10R relate to that? Well, here I've got 60D and also 4D. So how have I gone from 4D to 60D? Well, I can see that 4 goes into 60 15 times. So if I've times this side by 15 to get 60, then I need to times this side by 15. And 10 times 15 is 150R. So I know that 150R is equal to 60D, and I know that 60D is equal to 80C. So let's write that out a little clearer. 150R is equal to 60D, and 60D is equal to 80C. And the question asked me, how many rabbits weigh the same as 80 cats? Well, I've got 80 cats here, and I can see that 150 rabbits is equal to it. So I know that my final answer is 150R, or 150 rabbits.